Hello, hello, hello to everyone. This is Dr. Angela Spranger, Christopher Newport University's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And I am joined by several colleagues of mine. And I think I may be able to change the view. One thing that we didn't talk about beforehand was setting up the view. I'm going to put mine on gallery view so that I can see everybody in about the same size and layout. I believe that all of our participants, as you are coming on and joining us now, you should be able to set up your own screen to see us the way you want to. With this particular session, we're just going to jump right in. I will go ahead and say, for just in terms of administration here, we do generally turn off the chat function for the DEI dialogues because we want the panelists to not be distracted by multiple chats going on at the same time, but we do have the Q&A function on. So you are welcome. You are welcome. You are welcome. If you have signed on with us and you would like to ask a question, please do place it in the Q&A box. That way, one of us will get to it. I will certainly be monitoring the Q&A. So again, let's just go right ahead and get started. We are talking this month. This is our 10th and final DEI Dialogue Series event of the 2021 academic year. And we're going to close this year out with talking about Pride and celebrating Pride. We've had the opportunity to talk about social justice and policing at CNU. We've had the opportunity to talk about experiencing racism from multiple perspectives. We've talked about accessibility at CNU. We talked about voting and where do we go from here after the election in the fall. We've celebrated Martin Luther King Day and considered what would Dr. King say about where we are right now, particularly this was in January, so right after the 1/6 events. We talked about, Women's History Month and Black History Month. And we talked about DEI and sustainability. And I think I've listed all of them. And now here we are in June with a slightly more understated than it could be celebration of Pride. I know when we think about Pride, we think of parades and marches and big parties. But for this month, for this year, for this context, we just want to have a little chat and learn some things together. So I'll be your moderator for today's panel event, and I'll introduce the panelists in just a moment. Panelists, I'm going to lean on you for just a second. Is there anything tech-wise that I need to tell our attendees that I forgot? Am I good? Should I keep going? Okay. Thank you so much. Let me briefly do something that is a little bit new. I don't think I did this previously, so bear with me. But I do want to do a quick land acknowledgement. We are working on land acknowledgements here at CNU, and we're going to be evolving this. But I think, and I believe that my panelists will agree, that it's good, right, and proper to start from where we are and to do what we can do. And so land acknowledgements have become something of a best practice in conference and event planning. Many of us have seen them at conferences and different functions, but I've also been hearing about folks using them on college campuses in their syllabi, in programs, and in events like this. So I have a very brief one, a very light one, but if anybody wants information about how to approach land acknowledgements or how to honor Indigenous inhabitants, I do have some great web resources, some websites that I can send you if you just reach out to me in the Q&A or separately in an email at diversity.inclusion@cnu.edu. So I will say now that I am sitting on the ancestral lands of the Kecoughtan, an Eastern Algonquian Indigenous American people whose land we currently occupy on the Virginia Peninsula. They are the original caretakers of this land and the waterways surrounding it. And I give thanks. And I'm going to stop it there. It goes much more deep into detail, but I don't want to slaughter the pronunciations and get into the details. I'm going to keep practicing. And maybe the next year when we start this, we'll have a more robust land acknowledgement, maybe with some input from our local chiefs. So that is our land acknowledgement for today. Now I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Dr. Jeffrey Klein, who on my screen is on the top right. Will you wave at everybody, Dr. Klein? Is it all right if I call you Jeffrey today?
Yes, please. No problem. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So after obtaining his undergraduate degree at the College of William and Mary and his PhD from Florida State University, Dr. Klein began, I had to double check the pronouns on the screen there. Dr. Klein began at Christopher Newport University teaching in the molecular biology and chemistry department, garnering the inaugural Faculty Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2012. Currently, Dr. Klein is the Vice Provost of Research, Graduate Studies, and Assessment at Christopher Newport University and leads the university's efforts to maintain accreditation with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. Thank you for joining us today, Jeffrey. Next,
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Next, Dr. Danielle Stern. Also, Jeffrey, there's something I didn't mention, so I'm going to ask you to do it when we come around to you, okay? You know what I'm talking about. All right, Dr. Stern uses she, her pronouns, and Dr. Stern earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from Southern Illinois University and her PhD from Ohio University. She is an associate professor in the communications department at Christopher Newport University. Dr. Stern earned the Personal Narrative Research Award from the NCA Ethnography Division in 2015 and Feminist Teacher Mentor Award from the Organization for the Study of Communication, Language, and Gender in 2019, and the Ellis Bachner Autoethnography. Congratulations to you. And may I call you Danielle for our panel today?
Absolutely. Thanks.
Danielle's my friend. I don't think I could keep myself from calling her that. And now we have an alumna, Julia Duff. Wave. Thank you. Julia Duff graduated from Christopher Newport University in 2015 with a bachelor's degree in American Studies and a concentration in philosophy of law before obtaining a master's degree in student affairs and development from Slippery Rock University. While at Christopher Newport University, she worked in residence life and student intervention services. Julia currently works as the Senior Student Conduct Officer at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Julia. And now we have our special outside guest, Casey Butler. Casey Butler earned their master's degree in sociology with a specialization in gender, sexuality, and society from the University of Amsterdam. They are currently the Community Engagement Coordinator at LGBT Life Center. Before joining the LGBT Life Center, they served as a youth development specialist for the Peace Corps in Thailand, working to help develop and implement youth programming, and the Student Development Specialist and Chair of the Pride and Equity Faculty Staff Association at the University of Texas at Austin. Casey is the main point of contact to get involved with the LGBT Life Center through avenues such as volunteering and trainings and workshops. Casey, welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela.
All right. Absolutely. I'm so glad to have all of you. You can tell this is material and information that is near and dear to our hearts. Some of us are sporting our ally buttons. And so let me go ahead and lay a little bit of groundwork, if you please, and then we'll get right into the questions. In this panel discussion, we're often going to be talking about gender in binary categories and expanding our understanding of gender to encompass non-binary identities. As a cis hetero moderator, I recognize that while inaccurate and exclusive to some people's experiences, the binary approach, the binary language has been normalized and does help give us language to simplify discussion. I therefore ask for your patience and get eye contact with each of you, with me and with each other as we explore language and identity together and create safe space for our audience so that they will feel safe and comfortable asking questions and making their presence known as well. While it is the impact that is seen and felt, let's please lay a ground rule that we will assume positive intent. Thank you very much for that. I know that I need that grace. All right, so let's get started with definitions. I know that there are at least a couple folks joining us today, and I know that there are a lot more who will want to watch the recording. and that's why it was very important for us to make sure this got recorded, to learn some things about this whole topic, not just pride, the history of pride, what's going on right now, what's urgent. And I know some of you have some things that you could add to the conversation that I didn't have as prepared questions that we could really get into, but we have to start with the baby steps. Let's define. Where shall we start? Do we want to start with the L? Let's go ahead and I'll come and visit each of you so that you could give me your definitions as far as you want to go with our acronym set. Okay. I'm going to start with Casey. You're first on my screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. When I teach about the acronym, I usually teach about the history, right, of the movement and how the acronym has changed throughout the movement, and how that also kind of showed who was being centered. In the beginning, it was a very specific group, right? Mostly white, cisgender, gay men who were gender conforming in their presentation. Of course, we knew that there were other groups at that time that were also fighting for their rights. And they were told, we'll get to you later, so just hang tight. And of course, we've seen the impact of that, right? As far as trans people go in particular, you see how they've kind of been left behind and how people are slower to kind of get behind gender diversity when it comes to comparing that to sexual diversity, for example. But yeah, the acronym, I think it's becoming less worthwhile of an experiment to kind of define things nowadays, because we know if you run into somebody, they might actually have a different definition of that, or it might mean something different to them. So when I teach this, I usually say, we're talking about sex diversity, we're talking about gender diversity, we're talking about sexual diversity. Those are the big themes. And then there's a lot of identities that are involved. The Trevor Project has an annual survey, and they had for LGBTQ plus youth, and they found that there was over 100 different sexual orientations and over 100 different gender identities. So this experiment, while worthwhile for a beginner, right? You want to talk about the main kind of umbrella terms, and that's helpful, right? So you have lesbian, gay, right? These are two monosexual identities, right? Exclusively same gender loving. Then you have the B, right? Bisexual, right? This is a multisexual identity. So it's also an umbrella term for anybody that experiences attraction to more than one gender. And then the T came in, right, to really highlight gender diversity, and trans being somebody whose gender identity does not align with their sex assignment at birth. And most recently, the Q came in, and that is probably where a lot of contention is around the use of the word queer. And we could probably spend the entire session talking about just that word. But there is a lot of people that identify with that term. And there's a lot of people that don't like to use that term. And it's being used kind of as an umbrella term for the whole community, which has its own kind of complications. So yeah, the acronym it's wonderful. Actually, I think the acronym, what I suggest folks that are outside the community, when they're referring to the community, use the acronym. That's going to be the most inclusive way to talk about the community, right? There's a lot of people that will say the gay community, right? And we know that it's not just gay people, right? Those people will say the queer community. And we know that not everybody's on board with that. And we shouldn't be using that term, right? Especially given the history of it being a slur or pejorative. We want to make sure that people understand that people within the community can use it in a different way than people outside.
Yeah, so, I can relate to that.
I'll stop there because I already just... You were asking me about L, and I just jumped right in. And I'm sorry.
No, that's great. And what you did was sort of give us some guidance, right, for lots of folks here at Christopher Newport who really want to move into a new way of speaking and a new way of acknowledging the presence of everybody in the room, right? Yeah. So go ahead, you said, and use the acronym, meaning go ahead and say LGBT or LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus, but that's more inclusive than just saying the gay community or queer. I will tell you just a quick, and if anybody else wants to add to this, maybe just raise, I think we have the hand raised, right? Let me know. But a quick story, I was doing a workshop in North Carolina once several years ago and started talking about very carefully LGBTQ, because again, as I am not a member of the community, I want to be, just as I was with the land acknowledgement, very careful to make it clear that my intent is to honor and to treat all with respect. And I've learned over this first year in this job that one gift I can give people is to make that clear, to say that out loud, that if we check our heart and check our intention and make sure to act in accordance with that intention, then how others receive is really up to them. But in that workshop, I said the word queer. And I had some folks get really angry with me in the moment. And I don't know if any of you have ever done a workshop or been teaching a class where you're in front of the room and folks are going, wait a minute, you can't say that. And I was like, wait a minute, I checked with somebody who describes themselves as queer and they said, this is what that means. And you hit on that, Casey, the fact that people, even within the community, have different definitions. And that was why I want to just create space for y'all to talk about the definitions, and see if there's anything we need to clarify.
The plus is great too. I think the plus really kind of reaches towards that, like, yes, all the letters in the alphabet aren't going to be enough for us to really capture the complexity of what's happening. And I think that's exciting. It's a good thing. It can be overwhelming if you try and pressure yourself to get it all right and memorize it all. It's like, okay, if you get the core concepts of diversity behind what's happening, then, just check in with people, right? When they share their identity, thanks for sharing. Like, what does that term mean to you? And that's a good kind of conversation starter.
Thank you for that. Julia, come on in.
Thank you. I wanted to speak on the topic of using queer. So I'm a person who uses the term queer. I'm a lesbian, but I use the term queer to describe myself. And my wife uses the term queer to describe herself. And I think that we acknowledge and respect the history of that word, right? And it being a slur, and the weight that holds. It has now become, and Casey was speaking to this a little bit, a term that people use to describe the way that we think about it is something that just doesn't fit in any of the other definitions. And so, queer has become a great way to express, like, I identify in the LGBT plus community, but I don't love labeling myself any of those in particular, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, demisexual. Like, I just want to acknowledge that I'm part of the community, but I don't want to necessarily go into that, or I don't necessarily feel like I fit into one of those categories. And so I do think the language is really evolving, and I work with college students in my world, and I feel like they have expressed to me, and it feels like a common use of the phrase. And so I think you do absolutely have to be careful who you say that to. And it's like Casey was saying, it's a term that's used within the community, not necessarily one that should be used to describe the community. But I think it's important to acknowledge and understand that when we're saying I'm queer, that's what I mean when I say it.
Okay. Thank you so much. And you scared me. We will not stay on definitions the whole time, because you said one that I had not seen. And I was looking up just for fun. I was Googling how many different, identities and acronym letters were added to the acronym. And I had gotten to LGBTQQIP2SAA. And my brain just went, I need to stop. And I, like Casey was saying, there's no way I'm going to be able to memorize and get that right all the time. So, I appreciate the grace,
Yeah. I always think about sort of these identities as any other way that individuals sort of define themselves. And they're all very personal and very unique. And so there really is, I love that Casey talked about the survey and that the results that came from that.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many ways to talk about oneself. And so I think just recognizing the uniqueness and personal nature of these identities, I think are important for individuals.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to add anything? I think Danielle's the only person, but you don't have to. We can move on to the next question if you want to. If anybody wants to jump back in on the first question about definitions. And I will go check the Q&A right quick. Okay, I don't have any. Folks who have joined us as participants, just kind of listening and learning today, please do feel free to enter in the Q&A if you have a question about a word that is used, a word that you have heard, something you've been told not to say. I know that one thing that we are dealing with here at Christopher Newport, and actually, Julia, this is your wheelhouse, is students whom we serve, whom we love, coming in and presenting us with different pronouns, different identities, and urging the university to address their needs in new ways. I'll put it that way. So I know that there are folks here from the university community who may have additional questions or things that we're not addressing yet. So I just want to put that out there that it is welcome if you have a question. But I'm going to come back to the panel. And we can start wherever, whoever wants to put their hand up. Can you please share, when were you first willing to access and share your identity as a member of the LGBT plus community? What is something that has been meaningful to you along this journey of, you don't have to go into, the whole story, but maybe navigating your identity in the workplace, navigating your identity in society, what's been meaningful? So when were you first? I see you, Danielle, come on in.
I figured I'd raise my hand since I haven't shared anything just yet. I love the writing of this question. I'm a comm nerd, right? I teach communication, research communication, but the phrasing of access your identity, I'm someone right now who is writing a book chapter on trying to queer the coming out metaphor. And just within these few minutes of this discussion, as somebody who does identify as queer and bisexual, thinking about my use of the word queer in a textbook on communication, it's a little different because we're playing with words all the time anyway, but they've given me a lot to kind of think about as I frame that. And so what the words that we use matter, the context, of course. And so I had never thought of it in the phrase of accessing. Of course, we have the coming out metaphor. We could use communication disclosures about sexual identity or gender expression. And so with the wording and the spirit of this question, for me, the background is I was raised very committed and involved in the Catholic Church in a small town outside of St. Louis. And it wasn't until I physically left the geographic space near my family after 2 degrees and went to Ohio from Illinois for my graduate program, even though, of course, looking back, I knew I was a queer girl the whole time. And it wasn't until this space to be away from the repressive nature of my faith, and that's no harm to folks who still identify and are active in any forms of religion, including Christianity and Catholicism. But to be away from that and be around folks, I was in my mid-20s, and something just sparked. It's something that I realized then was always there, but it took me being on my own to access it. And it took me years later, at least 2 to 3 or 4 years later, after accessing that about myself in my mid-20s, to feel comfortable starting to share that with people in my family. But because I was studying gender and communication at that age, I had a supportive network of friends who were also professionals and learning the word queer for the first time and learning about queer theory and Judith Butler. So I accessed it through geographic distance from my family, but also through the nerdiness of critical theory, because that's who I am.
So it sounds like that is the thing that has been really meaningful for you on your journey, is the theoretical supports and structures that you encountered.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Julia, come on in.
Well, I related a lot to what Danielle was just talking about. I also grew up in the Catholic Church, and so my my experience is probably very similar to yours in that way. I knew that I was gay in the 5th grade. I remember it because we were being lectured. I went to Catholic school about why we shouldn't be saying you're gay as an insult, which glad that we did have that conversation. I was like, wait a minute, that's allowed? Oh, like I didn't realize that's what okay, got it. But I didn't come out publicly until college when I was at CNU. And so I think what helped me to access that identity at that time, and something that I love about the CNU community, is that I felt so supported in my friendships and my student involvement. The professors that I had gotten close to and had always been so loving and accepting of me. And so I just wanted to highlight, as someone who came out at CNU, as many students are these days, there are so many things that you all are doing right. And so keep doing those things. And some of them are, creating inclusive spaces, using pronouns, asking pronouns. Back then, it really was the relationships that I had. I had really close relationships to my advisor and my academic advisor, and then my supervisor in residence life. And I just felt so supported and accepted that I felt like it was a safe space to do that, to come out. And so creating that safe space, so important. And I applaud the safe spaces that I had and encourage you to keep making them for your students.
Oh, awesome. I will make sure to pass that along to our Vice President of Student Affairs, Kevin Hughes, and the diversity guy, Vidal Dickerson, who leads a lot of the initiatives and supports a lot of the student organizations. But Julia, since you were talking about it, is there something you'd like to talk about that you're launching now while we wait for Casey and Jeffrey to raise their hands and share their stories?
I'm working on hopefully creating an alumni network of LGBT alumni. It's something, so I came out in college, sophomore year, and had a really good group of friends who also identified in the community. And over the years, we, I kept my eyes on those people. I've stayed in touch with them and seen so many people, so many alum flourish in their identity. And so I just think it would be so cool to be able to have that community.
Julia, we'll certainly have to connect after the panel. I was a part of a group that started up our LGBTQ plus faculty staff affinity group. And as a part of that group, I've been able to connect with students who've recently graduated, and I've been encouraging them to do and start some of these alumni groups. So we will certainly have to connect and maybe share some names and some individuals that I know would be certainly interested.
I talked to Monica this week and she mentioned your work as well. We'll talk later.
Great. Wonderful. And while I'm unmuted, I'll sort of maybe address the question a little bit. And believe it or not, my story is very similar to Julia and Danielle's. I was raised Catholic, and the teachings of the Catholic Church at the time really sort of caused a lot of struggles from internal struggles and trying to wrestle with sort of my identity as a gay man. And so it was tough. And I can't say that it was easy for me to go through that process. I was certainly a little bit older in being able to recognize and understand sort of the Catholic teachings, but also then finding sort of representation outside. And it really wasn't until I found the theater community that I recognized individuals in this community and said, oh, I'm like that. That's sort of like me. And it gave me and empowered me to be able to access that part of who I am as a person. I look back and realize very early on I knew, of course, but it's this internal struggle that you have in it's wrong, it's a sin, it's and so it's this internal process that one has to go through to be able to eventually accept one's own sort of identity, and in my case, as a gay man. I did schooling in sciences, and there just isn't much representation from the LGBTQ community in sciences. We've gotten a lot better, which is wonderful. We still have a lot of ways to go, but it really was, for me, the theater community that allowed for some recognition of representation and other individuals that might identify in a similar way that I do. And so that's really what allowed me to sort of flourish. And it took time then to sort of, once I sort of accessed it within myself and sort of accepted it within myself, it took time then to sort of reach out and begin to allow others to see and be a part of that part of me, whether it's family and or friends. And I started easy. I started with the theater community and, sort of coming out and inviting other individuals to be a part of that aspect of my identity. And then eventually it was comfort piece, it's sort of being a part of that.
I lost some of your sound at the end there.
Oh no. You still got me?
I got you now.
Okay,
Thank
good.
You. And so it sounds like the thing that was really meaningful for you was the engagement that you had in the artistic community that kind of brought you through. And I do hear this thread of commonality. I want anybody listening to know, I did not know that thread was there. And there is no aspersion cast. Agreed?
Yes.
I also do want to put out there, though, that has been one of the things, and Casey, I'm going to hush so that you can come in if you want to answer this question too. But one of the things I have experienced, particularly in my faculty identity here at Christopher Newport, has been the perception that because Christopher Newport University, in its administration, its leadership, the people, it's not a thing. Like we often talk about, I taught organizational behavior for 9 years. We talk about organizations as, sentient things. That's not the case. It's people. The people here tend to be, we're Southeastern Virginia. We're in the Bible Belt. We tend to have a very strongly Christian population. We do have some Jewish, some Muslim, some Buddhist and Hindu folks here in all of our constituencies, staff, faculty, staff, students. But I think the identity of the university has been such that I've had students come to me and be a little bit cautious about what they felt like they could say. And, once they understood that I, as a person of faith, am commanded and happily programmed to just love them, to extend love to them in the way that is needed in the moment, then that breaks down the wall of, I'm afraid you're going to judge me. And so I kind of wanted to put that out there that it's not, there are faith communities of all kinds that have folks in them who are discovering who they are and that have felt oppressed in different ways. And there are faith communities that are welcoming. And I'm going to shut up now and let Julia jump in. Casey, you're not off the hook.
I wanted to jump in and just say, there are ways that you can signal to students that your space is safe. And because, I'm an alum of CNU, and I know that there was a huge Christian population there. I identify as a Christian. And that was like always my biggest fear, was like the coming out to other Christians or professors or staff members that identified as Christian. And even having a rainbow sticker on your, on your desk.
Bulletin board.
I don't know what the go-to is. On your bulletin board says, oh, it's safe here. Okay, this is going to be okay. It's a small symbol that, if you have safe space stickers or whatever, but it really does make a difference. And you might not think it makes a difference, but as a as a student, as a person navigating the world, when I go into someone's office and I see that little rainbow flag, I'm like, okay, don't have to worry about it. Cool.
Yeah.
We're good here. So I
remember that. That was a big deal. Not just the rainbow stickers and the rainbow pins and things like that, but separately, there was a year, I don't remember, Danielle, you might remember, a few years ago when it really was coming to light with Black people being killed by police, that folks started wearing safety pins and putting pictures of safety pins up on their office, like, I'll stand by you, I'll stick with you, I support you kind of thing. And so that was sort of a turning point for me in terms of recognizing how important those small gestures can be, just to let people know, I understand that you might be feeling something, you might be going through something, and I'm here for you. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question if Casey tells me so.
Oh, I can share as part of my story too. So I wanted to also mention that what y'all are talking about, I like the word micro affirmations. So it's like microaggressions, but it's the positive side.
Love that.
Little things that affirm you. And it doesn't have to be spoken. It could even just be like a look or a nod. And you're like, yeah, that person just used inclusive language and that made me feel good. Or that person just asked my pronouns and that made me feel really good. So like those little, I don't know, it's just a newer concept that I heard recently that I wanted to share because it kind of goes along those lines of those symbols that we see in those little gestures that can actually have a huge impact. So
wait, thank you. Let's celebrate that right quick because, it's possible to just feel like, oh, I'm just throwing on my pin and I'm going to be perceived as being performative. I put up a sign and people are going to think I'm being performative. I'm just going along with the crowd or whatever. But to know that it does matter. You see us, we at CNU, the kids, the students taught me that we give snaps here, right? We give snaps for that. So thank you.
Yeah. So my story, I was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, assigned male at birth, socialized as a boy, but was very gender nonconforming. Didn't really find myself belonging with either the boys or the girls, although I was much more interested in what the girls were doing than the boys. So I did, also happen to be raised in the Catholic Church, and I went to Catholic school too. And, am a survivor first and foremost in my identities. Survived a lot of abuse throughout that time, just bullying from not only peers, but adults, educators, administrators, other people's parents, so this kind of gender policing that happens with young people and with adults even too. And for me, right, the idea that I was feminine and perceived as a boy, the assumption there was that I was gay. So, I was just like, well, I guess this is, my future, my path, this is what people are assuming about me. So I guess it must be true. I did find myself attracted to other boys, but I didn't think that was all there was to it. But so I ended up coming out around 18 in college and coming out as a gay man. And then found that there was like a other level of like policing and like hyper masculinity that I was like, wow, I think I was probably better off, when I wasn't out, like when I was assumed a straight or whatever, default straight, as we do with kids. But yeah, so for me, I slowly started to unpack some of that around sexuality, finding myself attracted to more than just men. And so I eventually came out as queer, which I also love that term. For me, it's a way of saying I'm definitely not exclusively straight. So please do not lump me in that group. But I don't necessarily need to label myself in relation to the gender of whom I'm sexually attracted. So that for me felt like just a better space for me to explore my sexuality and then also my gender. So I eventually got my master's in Amsterdam and was involved in a lot of organizing and community spaces that were very much about like people of all genders, all sexualities. It was very much like expansive and creative and exciting. And I was like, oh, so when I was performing my femininity, it was being celebrated and people found it attractive and desirable. And I was like, oh my gosh, like being in, I actually went to college in LA. So, coming of age as a gay man in West Hollywood was not probably the best for somebody who was feminine. So finding myself in Amsterdam later in life was just changed my whole outlook, and not just my sexuality, but my gender. So I started to see that there was more
Casey,
than just.
I'm sorry, Casey, I misunderstood something there. And I wonder if you would clarify a little bit for me before you go too far on.
Sure.
Because I thought, again, cis hetero and East Coast sensibility. I grew up in Virginia and I've moved around a little bit, but I've spent most of my life here. And so there are some things you can assume about that. And so when you were saying coming of age as a gay man in Los Angeles, my mind went to, yay, that was wonderful. That was open and welcoming and comfortable because of assumptions that I might be making about the community there in Los Angeles. But then you were saying it wasn't great and wonderful and comforting. And so it wasn't until you were in Amsterdam that things kind of smoothed out. Will you talk a little bit more about that? Is that okay? Or
yeah, sure.
I don't mean to be putting you on the spot and getting too personal, but I just caught myself going intellectually.
This was, I went to college at 18. I went to LA, and I got the hell out of Texas because I was like, just get me as far away as I can go. And so, wanting to find myself. And, after I came out and I was out, in West Hollywood where all the gay clubs were, and it was very much about masculine bodies, masculine presenting. You had to be masculine to be considered attractive or desirable. So there was a lot of self-loathing and internalized depression that obviously was going on. Now we know, right? This was back in the early aughts. So, things have probably gotten better in LA. I don't want to diss LA now. I'm sure they've come a long way. But back in those days, yeah, it was like, people would look down on femininity and kind of, there's a lot of misogyny still in gay communities. So this idea like, well, if I wanted to be with a woman, I would be straight kind of thing. So it was a very shaming kind of culture around femininity. And that's not what I needed. I early in my life, I was a very feminine kid. And once I got into school, then I started to police that. I started to minimize that and regulate that about myself. And that, was not healthy for me. And, I was definitely, not in a good place mentally. And so finding myself in Amsterdam, being around people that were celebrating that part of myself that had been shamed for so long, finally got me to a point where I could start to grapple with my gender identity, which I found as non-binary. So I feel like, once I found that as an option, I was like, oh my gosh, where has this been my whole life? Like, this is me, like I'm non-binary. This is who I am. And, started to meet other non-binary people and build community around that. And, today I'm an out and proud non-binary person. I'm queer identified, and I can be out at work and I can talk about my pronouns and my identities and I can wear makeup or dresses if I want, or skirts or high heel. I could do whatever. My gender expression isn't being policed. My gender identity is being celebrated. I'm finally in a place where I'm being affirmed. After being in adulthood for 20 years, I made it. I finally am here and I did it. So it's also possible, it took a lot of, like I mentioned, I'm a survivor. I've survived a lot of trauma and assault and violence in my life. And, there were moments where I wanted to give up and I wanted to just, I thought maybe it'd be better if I just wasn't around. And I'm so glad I didn't do anything. I didn't follow through with those thoughts, because now today I get to be that person that I needed when I was younger. Yeah. And I get to share my story and, hopefully make life better for others. So yeah,
absolutely. I'm already unmuted, but I'm just giving you my happy noises. I heard something there and I want to celebrate it with you, that I'm glad you're still here too. I will say that, and this panel is not about me, but I will say that I am the survivor of suicide. My one and only baby brother chose to leave here way too early. And I am very glad. I don't know that it was related to gender identity. So again, I know this is not about me, but it always strikes me to think about the fact that there are people who, for whatever reason, and I did not know, audience, I swear I did not know they were all Catholic at some point. But to know that there are people who, whether it was religion, whether it was being Baptist, I grew up in a Southern Baptist environment, or whether it was being Catholic, or whether it was your work or your family or whatever, that because of who you are led you to a place of feeling like you were not valuable and that you didn't matter to this earth, because to the whole world, you may just be one person, but to one person, you may be the whole world. And it may be that the ripple effects of your existence are going to reach farther than you could ever imagine. And I'm so grateful that you tapped on that and said, because somebody who may hear about this conversation needs to hear that that moment may come, not in college when you first come out, but in Amsterdam when you first access who you really are. So that was one reason why. And I have to give credit, Danielle, to Jeffrey for helping me structure that question, because I think it is important for you all to have space to talk about when and where did you access who you are and begin to bring that identity to your everyday life. Danielle, come on in. I'm going to stop speechifying.
Casey, thank you for sharing that vulnerability. And that is the exact reason we need this panel, why we need Pride Month, why we need LGBTQ History Month in October. And Angela, I'm sorry I'm doing your job. I kind of shifted over to the next question, but because we have so many young people of all ages, but particularly young folks who may not see the representation in their communities, or the representation they see in their communities and in their families or faith communities is negative, binaristic, punitive. And so the comm media professor in me then says, well, if we only see limited representation in our homes and our communities, then we, of course, turn to media. We turn to online forums. I'm showing my age there by talking about that. Not, of course, now it's social media and it's TikTok, and we've got so much more nuanced and positive and diverse representation that a Pride Month to celebrate the joy, to help intervene in that repressive sadness that so many folks sadly do turn to, because that's the choice that they feel that they're presented with.
Yeah, they're the only option that's presented sometimes. And I think it can be such a beautiful thing. That's why I was celebrating all of you so much before the panel and at the beginning of the panel, because you're absolutely right. And I'm not patting myself on the back for having this panel, but you're absolutely right that we need to have situations and opportunities and dialogues and panels and safe spaces in which folks who are beginning the journey can look and see that there is somebody who may have started the journey similarly where they are, and yet maybe they haven't completely turned against all faith and religion, and they still have a faithful way of being. Maybe they are able to, navigate having a job and a life and a relationship and all that. Just giving people representation of surviving and thriving, not just surviving. I'm going to claim that for you, Casey, that you have not just survived, right? All of you are representations of thriving. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about pride. Let's talk about pride, what we're here for, right? In our last 10 minutes or so. Somebody tell me, what is the significance of pride? What is this pride? Why are we talking about pride, right? Let's just jump right in. What is pride? Come on, Julia.
So I just have to highlight, I think so many of us now see pride, and we see parades and rainbow capitalism, which is a panel for another day. And we forget that pride started as a riot at Stonewall, and being raided by police, and the patrons fighting back and saying we have a right to be here. We have a right to be ourselves. And so that's what I love about Pride is that it is to me a symbol of the tenacity of the LGBTQIA plus community and the claiming of space and saying like, yes, I exist and I take up space and I have a right to do that and I should be celebrated for it. And so, I think for me, Pride really is a celebration, but it's also remembering how we got here. As probably many of us on this call remember, not too long ago, before gay marriage was legalized in the United States, and 2015, I met my now wife prior to that. So when we got together, it was not legal for us to be married. And now I'm legally married in the state of Virginia. And so, I think we are not so far removed. The Equality Act currently going through and hopefully passing. And, I lived in Pennsylvania for graduate school, as you mentioned at the beginning. And there are no protections there. And my wife worked in a really homophobic environment when we were there and did not feel safe coming out because that was something you can be fired for. That is something you can be fired for in the state of Pennsylvania, sexual orientation. And so Pride is a celebration, and it's also the historic and the continued fight for the LGBT community equal rights.
Thank you so much. I love it. Yeah, go ahead.
Quickly echo what Julia said. We talk about celebrating the past and sort of the current with the pride and the parade. But as Julia said, looking forward, how much we still need to move. There's still 27 states that can discriminate against those that don't identify as, a heterosexual cisgender individual. And so whether it's employment or housing, so recognizing the progress that still needs to be made and, certainly leveraging what we've been able to accomplish thus far. But Pride is an opportunity for us to look forward and to say we still have forward momentum and movement we need to do. And I think Julia hit on that.
Thank you. And I appreciate, Jeffrey, that you added on to, a lot of times when we are in situations where we're agreeing with somebody, we'll kind of reiterate what they said, but you actually added on to what you said. And so we need to all remember and take away, because I'm going to ask you all, if you have more that you want to add to the significance of Pride, that's fine. But I know that some of you had obligations at 6:00, and I want to give you a couple of minutes to be able to receive any questions if we have any come in. And so I know we won't get to our fourth question, but in terms of looking at the significance of Pride, what can we do? And this kind of moves towards the takeaway, right? How can you help us? And I don't mean to put too much pressure on you, but what is the thing that we can do, all of us, whether you're in the community or cis hetero, to celebrate and support the folks whom we love, whether they're family, friends, colleagues, our students, not only during this month, but just in general going forward. What's a takeaway? And I got Casey's micro affirmations. I love that. And I got the comment, gender policing, avoid that, and rainbow capitalism, be careful of that, right? What else? What's something you'd like for us all to take away? For Pride and going forward, to take away the spirit of Pride?
I would just say, believe people when they share their identities with you, right? It's just not our job to make sense of it or try and explain it away or convince them otherwise, right? If somebody is being vulnerable with you to share their identities, believe them, affirm them in that moment. And maybe you don't understand the complexity behind it or everything about it, but they will remember how you made them feel in that moment. So it's there's just one thing, especially when coming out, I just remember those people that were like, oh yeah, we already knew. And it's like, that's not, you feel good because it's like, you knew before I knew, and I'm the expert of my life. So how the hell do you know that? Like,
Oh, I love that.
made
I'm
me
the expert
feel-
in my life.
yeah, like my story, like I was being deceptive or something beforehand, or I wasn't being my full self, or so also like being gentle with that. Like I know there's a tendency to want to be like super like on board and like, oh yeah, that's great. Like, oh yeah, we already knew, like it's fine. It's like, okay, just meet that person in that moment and say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Like, and that could be it. Right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's that follow-up question like, hey, tell me more about that. What does that mean to you? So I think, right, that would be like a good takeaway is just believe people, right? Treat them as the experts of their lives because they are. Nobody knows you better than yourself. And if somebody is being vulnerable with you, just, honor that.
Thank you for that. I know that I am speaking for people when I say that it is very possible that somebody might feel like, that's affirming to say, oh, I already knew. It's, no big deal. Let's keep moving. Of course, I've known this for years, but that might not be as affirming in the moment. And so a better approach would be to just receive it and affirm it authentically in that moment. Thank you for that. More takeaways?
I would add two things to that. First, on Casey's note, just because someone is out to you does not mean they are out to anyone else, to the community.
That's why this panel was so difficult.
So please remember that if a student comes out to you, if someone comes out to you, reacting exactly the way that Casey said, and then remembering that that's not your information to share, unless they have told you that it is. And so always keeping that in mind. And then the other thing being that coming out is not a one-shot deal. It's forever. It's your whole life. I come out every day. I officially came out on Facebook, many years ago, and so that kind of takes care of most of it. But I come out every day. I come out all the time, and so remembering that and in that it's a lifelong process, and people are going to be in different places on that journey. And
so I want to test an assumption with you right quick, Julie. I'm sorry to interrupt, but so if someone comes out to me, is it okay to ask them in that moment, what I can do with that information? Is it okay for me to refer to you, like to push a little bit into that conversation to make sure that I'm treating it with the proper respect going forward?
Absolutely. I think about another alum who I know who recently had a trans student in the K through 12 system come out to them. And her first question to me was like, do I switch the pronouns now? And I was like, you got to check back in with that student, because just because they told you that are now, that they, that they are trans does not mean that you should automatically switch the pronouns, because that could be outing them.
But checking in with them, whether right in that moment or after the fact,
or after
coming
the fact,
back to them and checking in and saying, hey, is it okay? How do you want me to refer to you when I talk about you to other people, or other people talk about you to me? Thank you. I got it. Any more takeaways as we close our time? There's a theorist, a leadership theorist, who talked about how silence is such a beautiful and delicate thing that unless you have something that is more valuable than the silence, then you should not break it. And so I will honor my friends and colleagues, Jeffrey and Danielle, because I feel from you, and I'm more of a thinker than a feeler, but I feel your affirmation for what Casey and Julia had said. Yeah? Okay. I know that there are so many more things that we could have talked about today, and so many more. And thank you. There were a couple of places where we just can't avoid slipping in some current things and things that are pressing issues. And I would love for us to go deeper on this material. And so maybe what we can do is later in the year, we have more folks around. We can do a live event and go deeper. We can call it a part 2 or just continue the dialogue. But I just want to say right now to all 4 of you how very grateful I am for us starting the dialogue here today. And I know that there are other conversations being had here at CNU. You know, we've got Spectrum, the student group, we've got the Allies group for faculty and staff. And, you know, there are different conversations taking place and that have been for the last few years. But I want to say to you all, thank you so much for helping me to close out this year's DEI dialogue series with a conversation about celebrating pride. And if anybody out there wants to reach out, and Casey, I'm putting you out there, wants to reach out and learn more independently, feel free to contact Casey Butler at the LGBT Life Center. You can look them up online. Casey also mentioned the Trevor Project, which is a fantastic resource for you all to know. And if you wanted information about that land acknowledgement that I did, just hit me up personally, and I'm happy to share with you the resources that I've used to pull that together. And I give credit to Professor Ann Mazaka Balechi, I'm careful not to butcher names, for creating the language, you know, pulling together the language that I used. Any other final thoughts, panel?
Nothing from me. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. So
Yes.
I would love to come back. So please.
Absolutely. Thank you
And
all
thank you.
again.
Yes.
So much.
Yeah.
You were all fantastic.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with you all.
Yeah,
We got to do
thanks
it
for
live so
sharing.
we can have dinner and beverages after.
Book club.
Yes. Oh, that's right. Anybody who doesn't know, we are having our book club, our summer book club gathering on Monday, and we're talking about a book in celebration of Pride, Megan Rapinoe's One Life. If you're interested, email me at diversity.inclusion@cnu.edu because we have to confirm the location. We just found out that our initial location won't be open. So thank you. And Dr. Danielle Stern will be leading that discussion on Monday. All right, guys, I'm going to shut it down. Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well, stay safe.
Yes. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.